I'd like to thank President Trump for his support. It was a tremendous validation of our meteoric rise in this campaign. He knows that we need to have new leadership in Madison, and he sees a lot of similarities. He didn't have to run for president. I don't have to run for governor. He wanted to drain the swamp. We found out it's a really big swamp.
Trump backed Tim Michels last night after winning Wisconsin's Republican primary for governor. Michels has embraced former President Trump's debunked claims that the 2020 election was stolen. For more, let's bring in NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, he's not the only Trump-backed candidate that prevailed last night.
That's right. No, Trump got some good political news last night. You could start with the race you're showing there. This is the Republican primary in Wisconsin. Tony Evers, the incumbent Democrat, will now face off against Tim Michels. It was kind of interesting, Trump backing Michels in this race, how Michels and Rebecca Clayfish, she was the former lieutenant governor. She served under Scott Walker. She had Scott Walker's endorsement in this race. She had Mike Pence's endorsement. It was kind of interesting how they both talked about the 2020 election, because this could be a live issue in Wisconsin going forward. If a Republican were to win the governor's race this November in Wisconsin, Republicans potentially through the legislature would have the means to change some election rules, election procedures, that sort of thing. Clayfish at one point called the 2020 election rigged, but then she said there was nothing that could be done about it. Michels has been much more circumspect in how he talks about the 2020 election and has really simply said that all options would be on the table for him. But he hasn't leaned so hard into that kind of rhetoric. But Michels ran with Trump's endorsement. Trump said that Michels is the one, in his view, who could beat Tony Evers. And Tony Evers says, hey, if a Republican wins this gubernatorial election, that means Republicans, he claims, Republicans would then seek to change the rules to allow the legislature in Wisconsin to pick the slate of electors in 2024.
So, Steve, a couple of things. A big night for Donald Trump. Mika and I, of course, because of our Connecticut ties, we're looking at the Connecticut race, a real shocker in the Connecticut Republican primary as well. But it shows against yet another Republican candidate that the Republican establishment absolutely loved and had for a very long time. This one wasn't even close. But Trump had some problems early on in this primary season. But, man, we've gotten to a stage now where if Donald Trump endorses you in a Republican primary, you're most likely going to win. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about that. We're not expecting this to be a particularly competitive general election race in Connecticut in November, but Leanna Levy comes in here at the last minute. Donald Trump weighed in with an endorsement in this race, and all of a sudden you can see Levy wins this thing in an upset, a 16-point margin here in the Republican primary. So, again, I'm not expecting this necessarily to be an election we're talking about in November, but just in terms of the influence with Republican primary voters, this is in the Northeast. Here's the Trump-backed candidate. Yeah. I think it's hard to say she wins without that Trump endorsement. We showed you Wisconsin a minute ago. The other piece of news that Donald Trump picked up last night, this is out in Washington State. Remember, it takes them, about 16 and a half years to count up the results in congressional races in Washington State. But we did get, finally, here from the 3rd Congressional District, top 2 primary, Jaime Herrera Beutler, incumbent Republican congresswoman. She's one of the 10 who voted to impeach Donald Trump. She conceded last night. She conceded to Joe Kent, the Trump-backed Republican who backs up Donald Trump's claims about the 2020 election. Now, we at NBC haven't technically called the race yet, but she's conceded it. And so that basically sets the stage here for the Trump-backed candidate versus the Democrat in the general election. And the broader picture, if you just zoom it out here, we've been tracking these. Here they are. Here are the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump after January in 2021, and here is their fate in 2022. And you see here, a lot of them simply chose not to run. Okay, you've got Herrera Beutler's going to lose the primary. Peter Meyer lost his primary last week. Tom Rice got clobbered in his primary in South Carolina. Notably, David Valadao got through his primary in California. Donald Trump did not make an endorsement in that race. So I think a big asterisk on the one win you have there. And then Dan Newhouse won in Washington in the 4th district. He may be best positioned here to survive in the general election. And then the only one left to come up here actively is going to be next Tuesday in Wyoming, Liz Cheney. I think you've certainly seen the polling. You know the expectations there. So there were 10 in January 2021 Republicans who said they believed Donald Trump's conduct was impeachable, and they backed it up with their votes. And I would say, looking at this, there's a chance Valadao could win this November. Certainly that's a tough district, but there's a chance he could win. But I think it's very possible you get to the next Congress and only one of them is left.
Yeah. You know, Steve, we've been talking for some time on this show, and I know a lot of other people are looking at some of these candidates and view them to be every bit as extreme as I do. And it seems that the Republicans are putting up the candidates least likely to win a general election race against Democrats. But then I think back to 1994. I could find you news articles in Roll Call and The Hill and you name it. You know where I'm going, where everybody said I was too conservative to win a general election. Gingrich came down and supported my opponent because I was too conservative to win a general election. These 74 other Republicans that won their districts, too conservative to win general elections. And then, later on election night, we found out, lightning struck, and that happened. It just is a reminder that as we in the media keep saying these people are too extreme to win general elections, that's been said before, and we wake up the next morning and find out that they actually did win, that no one, Democrats certainly should not take any of these races for granted.
We're at a really interesting point, Joe, because you could read this one of two ways. Like you're saying, you could read this as Republicans are putting themselves at serious risk here of blowing a golden midterm opportunity that they shouldn't blow. Or maybe, as you're saying, just that historical political gravity takes over. One set of numbers that I've been keeping in mind and following, I'll just put them up so you can see them here. It's the generic ballot. And if you check the generic ballot today, the Republicans lead the generic ballot by 1/10 of 1 point. Now, if you went back to 2010, which was one of those tsunami years when every Republican everywhere on the ballot won, at this same point in 2010, it was Republican +6. So we are not yet anywhere near the 2010 territory in terms of the generic ballot. But if you think back to 2014, that was also a big year for Republicans. That's when they won back the Senate. They won big in the Senate, and they brought their House numbers up to the highest level since 1928. At this point in 2014, the generic ballot, that's a D, was D plus 1.6. So we're not on target yet for 2010, but 2014 offers a cautionary note that these things can break late.
And we got to go, but really quickly, one more data point along these lines. I'm saying we got to go because Dan keeps saying, Joe,
you have to go.
We got to go.
Yeah,
but there is one more important data point. We've had 2 special elections over the past month or so in territory that Donald Trump won comfortably, and yet the Republicans underperforming the 2020 numbers, which, again, it just may be anecdotal, but, man, I look at election results leading into big elections, and here are 2 examples of Republicans actually doing worse than you would expect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying to load it here, and for some reason it's not giving me the results, but it was in the 1st district of Minnesota last night, and the bottom line is this is a special election. The Republicans are going to win this thing by somewhere around 5 points. Donald Trump in 2020 won the district by 10. In 2016, he won it by 15. So that's certainly off the Trump margin. The Republican spin on this is that Trump himself overperforms in this territory, but this territory had been more Democratic recently, and the Republican congressman who passed away to trigger the special election had won by just 3 points in 2020. So it's better than the former Republican congressman did, this margin the Republicans won by last night, but it is not in that territory that Trump was winning this district by.